Hi there. Welcome to another Meaningful Talks, Building a New World video and podcast. This podcast aims to be a set of conversations about different world visions, alternative models based upon citizens' happiness and well-being. Today, we'll be discussing about some grounded alternative models for increasingly just societies in which well-being plays a central role. So it's with a heart filled with gratitude, and it's a huge honor to be able to welcome our guest today, Ashish Kothari. I first got in touch with Mr. Kothari's work while I was doing research on alternative development models, and I found Pluriverse, a post-development dictionary. Pluriverse is a book that provides an extensive list of alternatives to development models and provides 1 to 2 pages summary of what each of these entail. For me, it was eye-opening, a ha-ha moment, if you wish, as I found out there was a whole group of thinkers investigating and proposing alternatives to the capitalist, neo-capitalist model we have. But introducing Mr. Kothari with this book is a huge understatement, as he has published or co-authored over 30 books and 400 articles. He is the co-founder of GTA, Global Tapestry of Alternatives, the Vikalp Sangam, Alternatives Confluence, Process, and a founder member of Kalpavriksh Environment Action Group. I hope I pronounced it correctly. He has promoted Equa Swaraj, or Radical Ecological Democracy, which are a vision of alternative society, as also a website and discussion list. Mr. Kothari is also an active member of numerous people's movements, co-chaired and was a steering committee member of several Indian and international organizations, and a board director member of Greenpeace International and Greenpeace India. So a very, very warm welcome to you, Mr. Kothari. So in order to kick off our conversation, could you share with us what drove you to do Pluriverse and what, in your opinion, contributes for?
Well, since I started working on environmental issues in the late 1970s in high school, I was with the group that I helped to start, Kalpavriksha, and a number of other movements, people's movements. I was working a lot on pointing out to the problems with the current models of development and political governance and the economy, especially from an ecological and people's livelihoods perspective. And I continue to do that, but over the years I also felt that it was important for us to be able to point to what we thought should be the real solutions or the ways out for people to meet their needs and aspirations, to remove poverty, to provide livelihoods or secure livelihoods, food and water and so on. And so, in any case, actually, even during those first few decades of working, I and other colleagues were looking at alternative models of conservation, because we were also questioning the Western top-down model of conservation, wildlife conservation, which was run by governments and where people were evicted from national parks and wildlife sanctuaries or stopped from doing their traditional activities. So we were working on those sorts of things. We were also in touch with a number of groups that were trying to revive or create new forms of organic or natural farming. So in some sense, there was already some sort of inkling in us that there are alternatives, that one doesn't have to go down this mainstream pathway of growth-based development. But then in the last 10 years or so, I felt the need to focus much more and much more systematically on alternatives, and not just in environmental issues, but the whole range of political, economic, social, cultural, ecological, ethical issues. And therefore, we began a few processes of trying to document what's already happening on the ground, understand these initiatives much more, and then on the basis of that, to try and create platforms of people being able to get together and share and collaborate and envision better futures. So the idea of Pluriverse kind of emerged from that. Not that it's my word; it's a word that I myself learned from other people, including my co-editor of the book, Arturo Escobar, who'd been working on this for many years. But the idea is really that there's not one alternative solution or one alternative pathway. There are multiple pathways. There are many worldviews, many practices, many ideologies, that provides real, genuine solutions, and which are alternatives to the current system. And but that they also have linkages, which are sort of ethics, the values, the principles are somewhat common amongst a whole lot of them. Those are the threads that bind them together, in a sense. So that's the idea of Pluriverse. And then we thought that there isn't really a single place or a publication that puts a lot of these examples from all over the world together,
Yeah,
which is
no,
what
not
led
at
us
all.
to the discussion on putting this book together, which has about 90 examples from around the world. The story of the book itself is quite interesting, but I won't get into that. But anyway, that's the
Ah,
reason
so
for Pluriverse.
oh, okay. So I think we'll book another chat just for that. I'm quite curious to understand what's the history and how it came about. But okay, since our time is not that long, I would like to talk about GTA now. And for that, I would ask you to allow me to do here a brief introduction of what GTA is, so our followers get a better context of this. So, GTA, Global Tapestry of Alternatives, is an initiative seeking to create solidarity networks and strategic alliances, building on already existing and new alternatives to dominant regimes. It aims to provide alternatives to the dominant regime that has led to deepening inequalities, increasing deprivation in old and new forms, the destruction of ecosystems, catastrophic climate change, ruptures in socio cultural fabrics, and the violent dispossession of living beings. Through a co creation collaborative process, everyone is welcome to contribute, learn from, and constructively challenge each other. GTA provides regular webinars on different topics, which anyone can join. As with Pluriverse, the knowledge is free and available to all. So, GTA has a hugely ambitious mission. What have been the main challenge you faced so far?
Well, maybe just also a quick minute on the origins of GTA, because you've described it well in terms of what it is. But the sort of inspiration for this comes from one of the platforms that we started in India called Vikalp Sangam, which is alternatives confluence of, as I said earlier, creating a kind of a process or a platform in which a lot of alternative initiatives can come together. And then when we were talking to other people around the world, including during the making of the book Pluriverse, or during international conferences on degrowth and Buin Viver and so on, we realized that there are similar networks of alternatives in other parts of the world. And so that the idea came, why don't we create something across the world that is able to put these different networks together, not like a hierarchical top down overarching organization, but just a process, a platform. And so the idea was seeded in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, in a address that I had at the International Degrowth Conference. And then it grew from there, and we finally launched it in 2019. The challenges are enormous. I mean, it took 3 years even just to launch it, because we were trying to create a feel for whether people even wanted something like this. Was there a need? Because there are global forums. There's the World Social Forum. There are others, and we wanted to know whether this is providing a need. Is there a niche for something like this? And of course, in our discussions with lots of organizations, it emerged that there was a niche. But that discussion itself took 2 or 3 years to make sure that and because what we're talking about is trying to reach across to groups in different geographies, different cultures, different languages, different ways of functioning, different ideologies, worldviews, different sectors of working, etc. So it's not easy. The conversations can be complex. The conversations can take time, and the conversations are not, especially if they're happening online, are not easy to do. It's
Yeah.
much easier if one is face to face, right? But online is not so easy. But nevertheless, especially since it was launched in 2019, online was the only platform we had available till now. Hopefully that will change now. So just being able to get on the same plane, to build trust, to build a relationship between these various networks all over the world has taken is enormously challenging. But it's also been very fulfilling, because those conversations themselves can be extremely exciting and challenging as in a good way, and constructive, and learning experiences. Um, it's also been a challenge to try and do all of this on a mostly voluntary basis. because for the first first initial period, we really had no resources. This was a new baby, and nobody's going to fund a new baby like that unless they know that there is something really coming out of it. So we were doing things voluntarily. There's a core team of about 15 people, most of whom are voluntary on this. So that itself takes is challenging. We now have one or two people who are sort of paid, but nobody is full time, and that itself is of course a challenge. Um, the other big challenge is being able to, you see, everybody who's involved in this, we have about 60, 70 endorsing networks and organizations around the world. We have a number of what we call weavers, which are networks who are already doing the weaving in their own country, like Vikalp Sangam in India. They're all busy 100% of their time already. So a network of this kind, a network of networks in a sense, is an add-on bit of work. And we know that the global economy keeps us all on our toes because it's so enormously powerful and destructive, and things are happening all over the world, not just the economy, but politics and war. And I mean, we see what's happening in and around Ukraine right now, right? So people are already mentally and emotionally and physically sort of busy with lots of things. So it's a challenge to try and sustain a network of networks simply because people don't necessarily have the space and the time and the energy. But I think we've been lucky and also fortunate in that people have seen the need for something like this, and therefore there's been considerable engagement from a lot of the partners and the endorsers and the viewers. And one of the offshoots of this, which is also now getting off the ground, is something called Pedagogue, which is the post-development academic activist global group. So it's about 110 people from around the world, of either academics or activists or people working on alternative learning spaces, learning and education spaces. So that's a kind of a offshoot of GTA working in parallel. So there are these sorts of things happening in parallel
So
or as part of
this leads me to the next question. So what are the plans for 2022? This is certainly one of them, I'm quite sure.
Yes, Pedagogue and a number of things that are happening under that, including, for instance, more sharing and more public webinars on alternative learning spaces around the world. But the other thing that we want to focus on a lot is mapping exercise. We have created a interactive open source mapping tool, which we are going to be helping our endorsers and partners to actually use to do their own mapping of the initiatives that they are networking, but also then create a meta map, a meta mapping across the world of these sorts of network initiatives. So that's something that's enormously exciting. We hope to do much more on that
It's
this
super
year.
complex.
Yeah, it is complex, but I don't know if you're familiar with the Environmental Justice Atlas, the EJ Atlas, that came out of the Autonomous University of Barcelona. It's an incredible thing. It's got, I don't know, 3,000, 4,000 cases of environmental injustice and justice conflicts all over the world. But that's largely focused on conflicts, and we hope that this can become a complementary one, which also then looks at the alternatives, many of them emerging from the conflicts, but many also independently of them. The other thing we want to focus on is last year we started a process of a dialogue between the GTA and 7 other global processes. That includes groups like the Global Green New Deal, Grassroots to Global Alliance, the Progressive International, towards a New World Social Forum, elements of the World Social Forum, and others. And the idea is that all of these global processes are looking for fundamental transformations in different ways, in different sectors, and different. Each has their own sort of specialities. So to try and create again a bridge, so that we have 8 of these working together. It's a process now that's called Adelante. So that has its own sort of parallel thing happening. We're hoping to do much more with the World Social Forum. There's a WSF coming up in May, early May. And we are also hoping to do at least 2 or 3 more volumes of what we call stories of resilience, stories of community resilience in crisis times. We've done 2 volumes on COVID, resilience in the COVID pandemic, but now we want to focus on other crises also: climate, biodiversity, inequality, war, etc. So we hope that a few, 2 or 3 more volumes of these stories, maybe about 25, 30 stories, will also be coming out, basically as inspirations what people can do. Things are not hopeless. there are many things that are happening and can be done. So that's the idea.
So it's going to be a super busy year. That's for sure.
Busy in a good way.
Yeah, in a very good way, of course. So, also contributing to alternative development models, you are also involved with Eco Swaraj or Radical Ecological Democracy. Would you share with us what this movement is all about?
Sure. So actually, this emerges from alternative initiatives on the ground in India, but also builds in elements from other parts of the world that we're familiar with. So the idea is, firstly, that democracy is not about simply going to elections. We call ourselves the world's largest democracy, India. And I sometimes question that because, yeah, of course, it's the largest population in the world in terms of going to the polls for voting. But is it truly democratic in the sense of, does everybody have equal voice? Does everybody have decision making power over things that are affecting their lives, etc.? And that the clear answer is no, that is not the case. We have enormous numbers of people who have absolutely no power in decision making, especially those who are most marginalized in society. It could be women, it could be what we call Dalits or the so-called outcasts, indigenous peoples or Adivasis, etc. So, what we call radical democracy is where everybody actually has power, and they are able to exercise that power in a responsible way wherever they are, in a village, in a urban neighborhood, in a school institution, in a NGO, wherever they are, right? So, as collectives. The second crucial aspect of that is control over one's economic means of production and consumption. Why should the economy be controlled by a capitalist who doesn't do any work, or a government agency sitting up there somewhere who has really no direct connection with the land or the forest or the machinery or the tools or whatever the production facilities are? And why should consumers not know what we are consuming when we go to a supermarket and buy something? So trying to bring back an economy of caring and sharing and gift, and really the recognition of the enormous contribution that many invisibilized people make to the economy. Women, for instance, which is never calculated in the the GDP economic growth calculations that countries do. So I'm both of these things together, the sort of trying to create that kind of real true democracy, political and economic, along with social transformations towards equality, along with sustaining cultural diversity, language diversity, along with the fight for the commons, nature and natural resources as part of the commons rather than privatized, knowledge as part of the commons rather than privatized, and all of this while sustaining the earth, because without that we're all dead anyway in the long run. So how does one then also respect the earth, respect other species? And that's why the ecological comes into the middle. And in India, some of this was encompassed in an ancient Indian word called Swaraj, which Mahatma Gandhi brought back during the independence movement. And it means autonomy and freedom, but with responsibility toward other people's autonomy and well being and freedom and happiness. So, in that sense, it also encompasses a whole lot of ethical values and principles of how to live, how to behave with each other non-violently, simply, etc., simplicity, etc., and with, as I said, respect to other species. And so Swaraj, but then eco Swaraj, which means also extending it to democracy, being extended also to all other species. So that's the term. It is in many ways very similar to others around the world, which are described in Pluriverse, the book, like Buen Vivir in Southern America, Sumak Kause, etc., or Ubuntu and many variants in Africa, Kyosai and others in Japan, uh, Shohoj in Bangladesh, and then with some similarities of concepts coming out of the industrialized West, like degrowth, ecofeminism, eco-socialism, etc. Crucial differences, but also very crucial commonalities amongst them, as I said, especially with ethics. So that's Eco Swaraj and its links to other such worldviews around the world.
And what are the next steps for the radical ecological democracy? What do you plan for 2022?
Well, a radical ecological democracy, of course, is a worldview or a concept, but it's also a discussion list. It's also a website. So just like we have a website for Vikalp Sangam and for the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, RED is also a website. And we're trying to use that as a means of shifting and influencing narrative, the narrative away from the mainstream models of development and governance and so on, but then towards the kind of alternatives that we're really seeking. So if you see the articles on this website and then which are then discussed on the e-list, they range from peace issues to community fisheries in various parts of the world, to people asking questions about what is the relevance of Marxism right now or the relevance of Gandhi right now. So all kinds of things, asking fundamental questions, but also pointing to what other sorts of solutions or alternatives already out there or that can be worked towards. So we're hoping that we'll work much more on this. It becomes a much more active forum of this kind of a narrative shift that we want. And in that sense, also connected to the actions that the GTA is doing globally.
With a more intense focus on ecology and the environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely, but also on peace,
Yeah.
on peaceful governance, on peace against the kind of warmongering that we're happening right now. Also on building bridges amongst different faiths and knowledge systems, because the other big crisis we're facing right now is where one religion is people from one religion are killing people from another religion, which absolutely don't need to do. The fundamentals of all religions are about solidarity and love and generosity, not killing each other. So it's really about trying to create much more contribute. I mean, I don't think we should say we're going to create so much. It's just one platform, one process. There are many others, but to contribute to this kind of transformation. Yes.
So now I would like to shift our attention towards the human being behind all these impactful activities. Your academic background is on sociology, a graduate degree in 83 and a master's in 85 with the Delhi School of Economics. How does a sociologist become a renowned environmentalist, an environment teacher, and an activist? What triggered the move?
Well, I think I was an environment. Not I think I know that I was an environmentalist before I became a sociologist. I'm not even sure I am a sociologist, because though I did my master's in it, I never actually did pursue it in an academic sense. Of course, I'm trying to understand society better and better, which is what sociologists are supposed to be doing. That, of course, is always my search, but not in a academic sense so much. As I said earlier, I started my environmental activism in high school. So before I actually did my college in sociology, I was already doing that. And even while I was studying sociology, I was trying to I was part of the environmental action group Kalpavriksha even then, which I'd helped to start. And then a lot of that activity continued during college. And I was also then sort of in my mind also trying to make the connections constantly between the social structures, cultural relations, etc., and the environment and ecology. Um, so I would say that in that sense, I'm not really a sociologist. I'm more of an environmentalist or an activist working on issues of environmental, ecological justice and rights and all the issues I've been talking about. Um, Nevertheless, I think it's important that disciplines like sociology or political science or any of the natural sciences, all the disciplines so called, are able to contribute to the ecological revolution we need, and vice versa. And that's one of the biggest problems with our academics right now, because firstly, you have these silos, right? Everything is split into all these neat subjects, and life is not lived in these kind of silos. Life is lived in a complex intersectionality kind of way. So how do we change academics themselves to, I mean, as universities or as schools, to fundamentally transform as areas of learning or spaces for learning in which this kind of multiple, complex, holistic sense is able to, we're able to learn that while as we're growing up. And how do we actually retain our ecological roots, our cultural roots, while we are learning things from all over the world, right? So I think it's this transformation that at least I've been attempting in my own life, and also then through things like Pedagog, trying to push it into the formal academic spaces, which
Again, a
I
tapestry of knowledge.
yeah, absolutely. So I think without changing the educational system, we really don't have much hope. That's where we all become what we become in as adults. Either in our families or in our schools and other learning spaces, or both. And unless those are transformed, most people are still going to grow up thinking that the thing to do while when growing up, when becoming an adult, is to become richer and richer and more famous and more powerful, rather than how do I become a better human being who's able to help other human beings and other species. So it's just two very different civilizational outlooks.
Absolutely. I found out that we both share a passion for photography. Can you share with
Mhm.
us what you prefer to photograph and whether there is any particular photo that moves you the most and why?
Sure. Well, I'm pretty eclectic with my photography, but I really, especially like wildlife and biodiversity. I think that's probably what got me hooked into photography in the first place back in high school. Um, I love landscapes, and of course, here in India, we have some incredible landscapes. So wherever I'm going, I try and get some pictures of that. I like portraits, but I also try and take a lot of photographs of ecological damage and or alternatives, to be able to tell those stories to others, who are not lucky enough like me to have traveled to these places. So I do a lot of presentations, a lot of slideshows with young people, especially in the last, I think, couple of years of COVID. I must have done about 150 presentations online. And so I'm constantly using these photographs because it's so much more powerful way of conveying something rather than just words or text. So I try and get as much as I can on what's happening in an area, both negative and positive. And so a lot of my photography is about that. In terms of images, I have, well, many favorites, but one that comes to mind immediately, and I don't know if I get a second, I can put it up for you, is I think in the late 1980s, I was at a people's demonstration in central India, where 300 villages of Adivasis, indigenous people, had gathered together to protest against two. Ah, you have it there. There you are.
Yes, I
Um,
do. So powerful. Yes, absolutely.
yeah. So this is the Indravati River, one of the biggest rivers in central India, and the government had proposed two mega hydroelectricity projects, dams, which would have blocked the river in two parts. And what these people said, and of course also these 300 villages would have been displaced, and all the forests that you can see in behind would have been submerged. That incidentally is part of a tiger reserve now. So what these people were saying in the demonstration was that not just that we don't want to lose our homes and lands and forests, but also that this river is our mother, and we will not allow our mother to be shackled by your dreams of progress. That's the way they were articulating it to the government. And in fact, the demonstrations did stop those projects. They were never built. So this part of the river still runs free, fortunately. So I love this image because I think for me it was a very powerful moment being there. It was a nice setting, as you can see, in terms of light, etc., and because of the story that it tells.
Of course, and of course, it's visible as well the power of a community coming together towards a goal. So, yes, it's very moving. So I couldn't help myself but sharing this while we chatted.
Thank you.
I think that's it. I cannot thank you enough, Professor Kothari, for all this. Thank you so much. It
Thank
was
you.
a huge
Namaste.
honor and a huge pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And that's it. We're closing another Meaningful Talks, Building a New World. If you want to learn more about Pluriverse, GTA, or the radical ecological democracy, please log on to the links we provided you throughout this interview. For the podcast lovers, sorry, you need to check the video. Mr. Ashish Kothari, I have just to deeply thank you for having had the time and availability to chat with us. It's been a great honor. Thanks. To all of you who were kind enough to watch or listen to this Meaningful Talks, my sincere gratitude. This video is available on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. You just need to search for Happyology And for the audio lovers, this format is also available in podcast, in Spotify and happyology.buzzsprout.com. Leave us your comments and suggestions. See you all soon. Bye.